Welcome to Meditating with John Vervaeke. This is the last time we will be live streaming on a weekday. Starting next week, September the 12th, we will be moving to Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And every one of those days will be a Dharma day. We're going to continue working our way all the way through the wisdom of Hypatia. I'm committed, and my team is committed to guiding you guys all the way through that course that will take us through the 3 degrees of the Western wisdom tradition. If you're joining us for the first time, don't be put off by this unusual setup. There are lots of videos available for you teaching you basic meditation, contemplative practice, moving mindfulness practices. Go to the links in the description, do lesson 1, and then do 1 or 2 lessons every week. And then what you can do is keep meeting with us on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can also join the Discord server. The links are in this video, description of this video. And there they are doing regular sitting. They're sitting twice a week. They are doing other related practices that have been taught in this course, like group Lectio Divina, the movement practices. They're going to be homing a practice I'm going to be reviewing today, which is philosophical contemplative companionship, which is a core practice within the extended Epicureanism that we've been learning together. I would ask you all to help me by liking this video and maybe the channel as a whole, as a way of raising its visibility in the YouTube algorithm. At the end, we will have some questions. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to sit first, obviously. We're going to do some chanting, and then we will have our silent sit. I will get up and move. We're going to cut from one camera to the other, but hopefully the technology will stay with us. Amar and Jason are behind the scenes really making things work. And I will review what we did on Monday about philosophical contemplative companionships. Then I'll return here to sit, and I'll answer some questions you might have. Please limit the questions at that time to anything from the entire ecology of practices, and I will give priority to questions concerning this most recent practice that we're learning, the philosophical contemplative companionship, which we've drawn from the work of Rand Lahav. And so I think without any further ado, we can get ready to begin. So please get yourself in your basic position. We will begin together when I say begin. We will start, as I said, with chanting, and then we will go into our silent set. Begin. One. Begin your silent sit. slowly come out of your practice, trying as best you can to integrate what you've cultivated in your practice with your everyday consciousness, cognition, character, and communitas, perhaps by reciting the 5 promises. Alright, so let's review what we've been talking about with philosophical contemplative companionships. Reminder that we're making use of the work of Ran Lahav. Here's one of the books. That's the main one we're using. Another one that's relevant is this one. And then behind it is this more comprehensive work. I'm not expecting you guys to read this. It's just there as a resource. My job is to help translate it to you. So let's remember the 3 things we're trying to do, and we're making sense of the text. I'm going to use MS for making sense of ourself, and making sense of others. And these 3 are mutually interpenetrating, interdefining, and interaffording. Okay, so we talked about making sense of the text and what were some of the core principles we discussed. We discussed that we're going into an adverbial mode. We are trying to, if we're reading a text by Plato, we're trying to learn to see the way Plato did, to see things platonically, to hear things platonically, to speak platonically. And that leads us into that we're trying to envision, right? We're envisioning, we're trying to see, right, the way Plato did, or Epicurus, or Marcus Aurelius, and we are trying to invoke the presencing of that person. We're trying to give voice to them, we're trying to feel the presence. And this takes us into a different orientation with the text. We're not trying to just gather information from the text, we're trying to presence the person of the text for transformation. And this is an idea that Leo Ferraro and I talked about, myself and Leo Ferraro, in the chapter we published in the scientific study of personal wisdom, from contemplative traditions to neuroscientific investigation, or something like that. I think it was 2013. And we talked about a practice called internalizing the sage. So we have this term, right, of a role model, and it comes up in things like coaching, right? What's a role model? So, I mean, one of the things you learn as a parent is kids pay way more attention to what you do because they're imitating you than what you say, because they're not largely trying to store propositions from you. They're trying to transform themselves into persons, Role modeling is about the process of an imitatio, a mimetic activity, so that we come to be like the person. And this goes to internalizing the sage. This notion of internalization comes from the developmental psychologist Vygotsky, one of the greats, second only to Piaget. And Vygotsky talks about a process. So let's remember the metaphor that we're using here. As the child is to the adult is to the sage. And the text is, we're trying to, personify in a very powerful sense. We're trying to personify the text. We're trying to personify and presence the sage. So what Vygotsky talks about is, let's say here's my one of my sons when they're younger. Here's me, and here's a problem that, right? Now my son can't solve that problem, and he has a particular perspective on it, and that perspective's not quite working. Now what I have is I have a perspective that encompasses both his perspective and my perspective. And what he does is he tries to imitate me, because when he's within this perspective, he can't see the biases of this perspective, and he can't see goals and values that lie outside the perspective. I can see those goals and values, and I can also see the biases within his perspective. And by imitating me, by trying to presence my perspective and envision it and invoke it, he eventually gets this ability to take my perspective on his perspective, and then he internalizes that ability. It becomes an ability that he has for himself. He can step back and look at a perspective. He can reflect upon it. This is how we get what's called metacognition. This is our awareness of our own thinking and reasoning. Meta, above and beyond, like metaphysics. Metacognition. But as the child is to the adult is to the sage. We want to presence the perspective of the sage so that we can self-transcend, transform, we can self-transcend by internalizing the perspective of the sage. That will help us to see the biases of our everyday perspective, and it will help us to envision and taste values and goals that are not available to us from within our perspective. This is primarily how we aspire. So what we're doing is we're trying to envision the text. We're trying to invoke for internalization the presence of the sage, so that we can role model that person, that personification to each other. Okay, making sense of others. So we talked about creating a space within ourselves, a silent, sensitive space, and we're letting what other people say reverberate in us, very much like what we do with Lectio Divina and a text. And we are also trying to internalize the perspective of others. So the sage is an important voice, maybe the central voice, but all the other voices are important too. We are forming a chorus of voices, and each person is like a mirror of all the other voices. We're internalizing them and trying to self-transform in that fashion. Okay, making sense of others. Making sense of self. I already did this. Making sense of the text, making sense of others, making sense with others. Okay, so what we're doing here, I think I did the wrong thing at the beginning. I put up three things, and I meant making sense of the text, making sense of others, and making sense with others. I apologize for that mistake. I put making sense of self here. That's enmeshed in all three of these. So please note that. That's a mistake. I apologize. The triad should have been making sense of text, making sense of others, and then making sense with others. I apologize for that mistake. Okay, because what was in my mind was I wanted to convey the self-transformation, the self-transcendence. So that was uppermost in my mind. That's why I made that mistake. Okay, making sense with others. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to resonate, right? So when we're speaking, we're trying to resonate, and when we're listening, we're trying to resonate with others. And we're trying to incorporate what others say. Whenever we speak, we don't speak as if we're a monolithic, isolated voice. I pick up on what other people have said and what the text has said, and I incorporate it in like a jazz musician, and I try to resonate with what other people are saying. So what does that mean when we're making sense with others? I'm not going to engage in agreeing or disagreeing with the text. I'm not going to evaluate the text. I'm going to avoid speaking automatically. I'm going to avoid speaking from autobiography, and I'm going to avoid speaking from authority. I'm trying to break monologue so that I can make real dialogue possible, not pretended dialogue within the safe security of my egocentric monologue, but genuine dialogue, which is vulnerable and open to other people. So I'm not trying to primarily explain the text. I am trying to exemplify it. That's how I'm going to make sense with others. We're going to give voice, we're going to presence, we're going to resonate, we're going to incorporate. So I talked about 3D co-emergence. I want to get the depth of the text. I want to get the depth of the self. You can see that's where the confusion came into my mind. And I want to get the depth of others. Okay? These are all co-emerging together. 3D co-emergence. When we talk about getting to the depth of the self, think of that aspirationally. It does mean getting to that silent space and trying to speak from the depths, but the depths are aspirational, right? They're not a secret, secluded self. The depths of yourself are those parts that are now coming into emergence. All right, so we talked about the basic setup. We talked about a 4x4, 4 people that commit to 4 meetings, about an hour to an hour and a half long. There's going to be a facilitator at each meeting, one of the 4 people, and then that's going to rotate with every meeting. And what the facilitator does is they organize the order of the people there. If you're doing it online, which would probably be a good idea, it's alphabetical order, and each person memorizes who comes before them and who comes after them. Take a few moments to do that. The facilitator is also going to guide people through the practice. Right? And the basic sequence is the facilitator welcomes people, right? Then we set up the core 4. Everybody does, the finding their center, finding the root, finding their flow, finding their focus. Right? Then we do the main exercise, which I call the ritual enactment. And then D, we do takeaway. Don't forget the takeaway. The takeaway is very important. That's an important pedagogical principle. Okay. What are the procedures? We talked about the various procedures. One is slow reading. This is the core interaction with the text. So you're reciting the text, not just reading it. It's like Lectio recitation. You're reciting it the way you do in Lectio Divina. You're pausing so that people can gather and internalize. And what you're doing also is, right, everybody is trying to internalize the text as it is being written. They're trying to put into practice all those principles I've been talking about. We have precious speaking. So you're trying to hear, you're going to respond to the text. There's going to, like I'll mention this later, you have a question. Impression speaking, you respond. So you're trying to say as much as you can with as few words as possible, 1 or 2 sentences maximum. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to savor what you're saying. You're not trying to speak about the text or just respond to the text. You're trying to speak through the text, right? You're trying to do all that stuff I said about you're trying to internalize the Platonic or the Socratic vision. You're trying to presence the sage. You're trying to speak through the text. You're trying to, right, see through the text and beyond the text and by means of the text. The texts are your glasses by which you train yourself to envision the right adverbial, to see as the sage sees. Okay, so that's precious speaking. We're savoring, we're deeply savoring. And you're speaking to resonate with the people around you. You're trying to set up the concert of the chorus of voices. You're trying to speak in concert. Think about that. Speak in concert to create a chorus of voices. Finally, one more point for precious speaking. You're always speaking to presence. You're trying to do the 3D co-emergence. So that's the main thing you're trying to do is to, it's almost like magic. You're trying to speak into existence. You're trying to invoke, afford, evoke 3D co-emergence of depth. Okay, so now intentional conversing. So there's, of course, now it's between people, and what we're doing here is, remember, we're listening when other people are speaking. We're listening from the depth. We're creating that inner, right, that inner silent space of receptivity, so that the people's words can reverberate within us. And we're savoring what other people are saying. We're savoring it. That's why you're doing all this savoring practice. We're bearing witness to epiphany, to use Rusin's beautiful phrase. We're bearing witness, like the witnessing of a birth of a child. You're trying to bear witness to, like we're midwifing each other, to use the Socratic metaphor. We're trying to bear witness to the birthing of people and the birthing of the personification of the sage. We're bearing witness to conception and birth in a deep sense of that metaphor. When we speak, of course, what we're doing is we're doing extended precious speaking. Now, right, for precious speaking, we speak for about 1 or 2 sentences. In intentional conversing, we speak for about 1 or 2 minutes maximum, 1 or 2 minutes maximum. And what we're doing is, as we're speaking, right, we're speaking in the way, in the manner and the way we do precious speaking. We're just extending it now. It's more responsive. And of course, we're always trying to speak to resonate with others. We're speaking in concert for a chorus of voices. We are trying to speak, right, we're trying to speak into existence, 3D co-emergence. And then the next one, right, is rumitatio, philosophical chanting. The facilitator will pick a sentence from the text, make sure that everybody has a basic understanding, and then in sequence, in the proper order, people chant, and you have chanting practice, chant that sentence. When you are not the person actually vocalizing, you are silently reciting the text with the person who's chanting. At the end of every round, there is a pause so people can gather, right? The logos can take shape within them. And of course, all the way throughout, we are savoring. We are savoring. We are savoring. All right. So, what's the main exercise? The ritual enactment. We start with slow reading. Then we move into rumitatio. Then we do precious speaking. And the precious speaking is in response to a question, which can be spoken by one of the group or perhaps the facilitator. What is the text provoking or invoking within you and between us? What is the text provoking or evoking? And the precious speaking is a response to that question. And you do that for as many rounds as you wish to do. And then you move into intentional conversing. And then the fifth thing is the takeaway. The facilitator announces that the intentional conversing is over. Everybody can step into a more reflective, explanatory, autobiographical mode. Here's where you go into explanatory, autobiographical, reflective mode. And what are you taking away from the session? What are you taking away? How is this touching you personally? How are you going to transfer this into your life? How are you going to integrate this into your everyday consciousness, cognition, character, and communitas? Final thing, where would this sit within the overall ecology of practices? That's hard to say because we're still working through the Western tradition. What I would recommend perhaps right now is that if, for example, on the Discord server, you might want to alternate between Lectio Divina and philosophical contemplative companionship, because they really do, and this metaphor really sings now, they really do speak to each other in a powerful way. But I don't want to mandate, I don't have that authority or the relevant expertise. I think, but if you have people doing Lectio in one and also PCC separately, that's fine. But getting it would be optimal to my mind that if people were practicing both in some kind of tandem relationship, because they speak to each other, they correct and afford each other. Okay, so that's everything. Again, sorry for the small glitch in the presentation. I hope that was clear and a helpful review. I'm going to now move back to the cushion so I can more properly see the TV, and we'll address any questions that might be coming up. Great. And Grennan, I've just started interacting with the Sang this week, and I notice a lot of contraction in my body as well as what I would call selfing as I interact with the other egos. Can you recommend? So I don't remember what lesson it is. In fact, I talked about it at various places. You might want to take a look at Michael Washburn's book, The Ego and the Dynamic Ground, because he talks about a phenomenon called body armor, the way in which, and this is also coming out now in more recent work on trauma, the way we store, right, and we, I like your verb, we self, we store certain patterns of how we frame and identify things in situations in the world, and assume identities in response. All that selfing is a deeply embodied and often armored way. We contract and we hold. And so one of the things to do is to get very deeply into the core four, especially finding your flow, finding your center, finding your root, finding your flow. These really open up your body. Make sure you're finding the focus that's the soft vigilance, because a hard focus kind of concentration, which is not right concentration, is conducive to that contracting and holding. You want the soft vigilance. Taking up practices like Lectio Divina tend to open us up to perspectives other than our own in a way that it is much more nurturing and educing. It draws us out. That's what the original meaning of education, to educe, to draw out. You want to, hopefully you may perhaps learned where we've talked about the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. I believe that's lesson 6. We talked about how to do metta, which is lesson 5, learning how to do metta towards those areas, applying the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness to those areas of contraction, that sense of, like you said, we're sort of selfing, learning to come into a proper relationship of mindful befriending of those of that contracting and selfing through these kinds of practices is a powerful way to build up a transformation. The reason I'm hesitating is your overall attitude and framing of this has to be one of befriending. You have to let it. You have to be patient, like a friendship. You have to let it unfold at its own pace. So you have to have the diligence, right? The commitment to being present and engaged and receptive and responsive, but you also have the patience to let it unfold as it will. So Karima, Cynthia Clayton, hey Karima, it's always wonderful to get your questions or observations. Observation, my mind has become clearer, more organized, friendly, free, more than knowledge every day. You brought hope for the journey of the awakening heart within group communion. Only this evolves us. Thank you, Karima. That's wonderful for you to say that. First of all, it's encouraging to me, and so I do appreciate that. I hope it's encouraging to everyone else. So this is going to be an ongoing thing. Remember, do not just share your questions. They're valuable and important. But sharing your observations, your edifications, your mutual encouragement, right? That's such an Epicurean thing to do, mutually encouraging each other. This is very valuable. This is very important. I released a video yesterday with Jordan Hall, and Jordan has a wonderful saying, which we discussed at length, and I discussed something that had really touched me. I had just finished reading Albert Camus' The Plague, and I was talking about something that touched me, and we put these two into dialogue, but he has this thing he says, the next Buddha will be the Sangha. And I think that's just profoundly right. Given what we're facing, we're going to need collective intelligence, and more so than that, we're going to need collective wisdom for what's coming, and that's what we have been building here. The next Buddha is the Sangha. So encouraging and edifying each other with these kinds of observations and sharing are just as important as the asking of questions. Pedro Costa, can you advise how to meditate with eyes open? I can't very much because I don't have much experience and therefore not much relevant expertise. I can pass on what I've learned, mostly secondhand, with a couple of first-person perspective tries. Actually trying it firsthand. That's what I'm clumsily trying to say, right? So the idea is to keep your eyes open and generally semi-closed and looking down onto some place on the earth that you pick as the spot as your meditative focus. You don't want to be sort of up and like this, because that really opens you up. Now that sort of stance is appropriate for some of our moving contemplative practices, but if you're actually trying to engage in meditation, right, you want Austin, the guy who wrote Zen and the Brain and other work, he has research showing that when you look up like this, it takes you into the third person perspective processing areas in the brain, and when you look down like this, it shifts you into the first person processing areas of the brain. So it's important, but do that without tilting your head, right? So you have to pick something sort of, I'm doing it so you can see it in the camera, but that means I'm tilting my head. But you want to be eyes semi-closed, looking out, right, onto a space on the ground. I don't practice that way, so I can't give you much more than that. I understand some of the basic reasoning why you would engage the way that you do. I've only tried it once or twice. I don't have a lot of confidence in it, and it's especially important to make sure that when you're looking out, that's not excessively triggering mind wandering. I think it's important to do open eyes practice very much, and that's where all the moving mindfulness practices work for me. The moving mindfulness practices that I've taught you, and also the Tai Chi Chuan and other things, that's where I do the open-eyed mindfulness practices. Matthew McCready. Question: I've been trying to change my attitude towards those around me who seem to live an unexamined life. I've been directing metta towards them to see their moreness and bring more compassion towards them, but I still don't have an understanding of how they can live that way. Is an understanding necessary, or is compassion enough? That's a hard question to answer. Depends what you want the understanding for. So there's an important sense in which understanding something more deeply, in fact, enables our compassion. But I wouldn't want to say that simply having a theoretical understanding is any kind of replacement. If you have to choose or prioritize, the compassion is more important. But I have found, and I try to practice it, I was practicing this last night in a conversation, I have found that if I can try and get compassion and understanding to, well, dialogos with each other, they do mutually afford each other. So trying to remember, so every day I make a commitment to myself to be, to try to be honest, because I know the sting of deception, and to be honorable, because I know the sting of disappointment, and to be humble because I know the sting of arrogance, and to be helpful because I know the sting of fate. We have to remember there's a thing called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is when we see other people's flaws, we tend to attribute it to their character. And when we see their success, we tend to attribute to their circumstances. So he did something, wow, that was a bad thing. He must be a horrible person. Oh, that was a wonderful thing. He's probably had some very good circumstances and luck. And then we reverse it for ourselves. When I do something great, it's due to my character. And when I do something shitty, it's due to my circumstances. And we all do this. It's one of the most powerful things we do. So we have to constantly, and when I'm doing my bias noting, there's so many days when the bias that comes up for me is the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error again and again and again. And so when we're asking this question about other people, what we need to do is ask it dialogically. There have been large periods of my life where I wasn't pursuing an examined life. What was going on in me? Why was I doing that? Was it just because I have a flawed character? No, the fundamental attribution error is actually going to help you. It's going to help you look around for the circumstances and the factors and the causes. But don't forget that. Transfer that back to the other people. Right? Well, I remember I acted this way and I was really hurt. And I was dealing with something that initially overwhelmed me, an aspect of fate. And that's why I had body armor. That's why I didn't examine this, right? Well, that's plausible that that's what's going on for other people. And when we start to understand them by reversing the fundamental attribution error, we can ask this question in a fashion that is much more conducive to the generation of compassion. It's not easy. The fundamental attribution is really hard. And for somebody like me who's got rejection sensitivity disorder, socially phobic, I'm so prone to being defensive. It takes work and practice to do this. But here's what's encouraging. We are all deeply susceptible. Anybody who's saying, I don't do that, read the literature, please. We all do it. And that means we're all in concert together trying to help each other to overcome the fundamental attribution error as much as possible. So I hope that was helpful. I want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank my beloved friend at Technomage Amar, my beloved friend and son Jason. It's funny when your children start to become some of your best friends. It's an interesting change in your life. They're doing so much. I hope the technology, we're getting better and better. Please be patient. This is the last of the weekday classes. I'm not going to repeat everything I've already said at length. Just to say once again, I love this. I love the Sangha. I'm so proud of what we have done together. So thank you very much. But it's not over. On the 12th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we're picking it up and we're continuing on through the transformative, aspirational journey through the wisdom of Hypatia. Please subscribe to the channel to be notified of the next video. Also, if you're not opposed to it in principle, follow me on Twitter for any update on the streams. Invite others who might benefit by sharing this series with them. It's very important that people join the Discord server. That's where the daily sits, the Lexio, Divinas are taking place, the moving practices, yoga, the philosophical contemplative companionships are going to be homed there. Please remember, continuity of practice is more important than sheer quantity of practice. Don't hold yourself to the standard of harsh perfectionism, but of virtuous friendship. Because there's no enemy worse than your own mind and body. There's no friend, no encouraging ally, no genuine philosophical contemplative companion on the path as good as your own mind and body. Be lamps unto yourselves and to each other. I'll see you on Saturday the 12th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Take care, everyone.